Welcome back to WD Live. We're here at Women Deliver in Vancouver, having a fantastic conference. Lots of conversations about the future of equality. I'm Raj Kumar. I'm the president and editor-in-chief of Devex. I'm here from Washington, D.C., where I'm based, and here to talk about childhood and children with the CEO and president of Save the Children US. Carolyn Miles is with me. Carolyn, you and I know each other from the fact that I sit on the board of trustees over at Save the Children.
That's right.
And I am familiar with what you're holding in your hands today, which is the Global Childhood Report.
Yep.
Something I think the third time now Save the Children has done this research work to look at what does it mean to be a kid today?
Yep.
What is up with childhood today? And I think there's a lot of really good results in that report. So I'd love to hear from you. What did you learn the third time now looking at these, at where children are in the world?
Well, thanks, Roz, and great to be here at Women Deliver. As you said, this is the third year that we've done this report, Global Childhood Report. And this year, what we saw, we actually looked at 18 years of data this year. So instead of looking just year on year, we looked back to 2000, between 2000 and 2018, which is also the life of a child, the lifespan of a childhood. And we wanted to look at how countries were doing. So we compared 176 countries around the world. And there's actually a lot of really good news in this report. So we have 8 childhood impactors or enders that we look at. So things like child mortality, child marriage, child labor, malnutrition, those kinds of indicators that would be indicators of a not so great childhood.
Yeah.
And across really almost all of those, we saw a really dramatic improvement. So one of the biggest indicators would be child survival. So do kids actually make it to the age of 5? And that number globally has gone down by 49% over the last 18 years.
Wow.
So some really fantastic news in this report for kids. And it basically says this next generation of children, there will be 280 million children who are far better off than they were back in 2000. So some really great things.
That's incredible. Now, Save the Children is celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. The organization's been doing this a long time.
We have.
What is it you think that's happened in the last 18 years that has gotten us to such dramatic progress in many countries in the world?
Yes, I think in many countries that we actually talk about 10 factors that really influence, we think, childhood. And there's a couple of key things. One of them, actually, that's really relevant for this particular conference is 2 things about focus on women and girls. So making sure that women and girls, who are oftentimes kind of at the end of the line when it comes to things like education and when it comes to things like malnutrition, so bringing girls and women to the front of the line, putting women into positions of power, so putting women into parliaments and the highest levels of government.
So you've seen that. Women in positions of power leads
really
to better childhoods in the country.
That's right. Well, and if you think about it, women politicians are going to make policies and drive policy that actually impacts mothers and children, right? Makes sense.
It makes sense.
So that's one of the indicators that I think is really important. And then probably the third one, and I have seen this over my 20 years at Save the Children, having a commitment by a country that children actually count and that children matter. That is super important. And if you look at the countries that are at the top of the index versus the ones at the bottom, you see these kinds of differences in
What does it mean
commitment.
to say that, to have a country that's committed to children? What are some of the things that you
Well, I
look
think,
for?
we look for policies that are about, for example, in education, we look for policies that are about getting kids started on education early. So things like universal preschool really make a difference. And the country at the top of the index this year is Singapore.
Okay.
There are virtually no out-of-school kids in Singapore. But when you look at other countries, obviously there's millions of out-of-school kids still around the world, many in Africa, many in Asia, but even in developed countries. If you look at the United States, where I'm from, and you look at preschool-age kids, 50% of preschool-age kids in the United States are not in preschool.
And that's because government doesn't fund it.
Government doesn't fund it. It's a state-by-state program, and so you really have to, and sometimes a town-by-town program, so you really have to fight that battle over and over. In a country like Singapore, they've said universal pre-K, we're going to do it everywhere for every child.
It's a really important point because people might be tempted to think this is purely a resource question. The poorest countries don't have the money, so they're not going to have school.
That's
But
right.
you're saying really it's not purely about those resources. It's really
No.
about commitment.
No, and I'll give you a really good example. I was in Ethiopia just a couple of weeks ago, and that's a country I've been traveling to for again 20 years,
Hmm.
and it's a country that basically have made this commitment to children. They've said our kids don't have to die of things we can prevent. Our children should all be going to school. We should be ending the practice of child marriage. Those kinds of things are very much at the top of their agenda. And we used to work primarily on child survival in
Hmm.
that country. So Save the Children has a big, big presence there. Our programs used to be about saving the lives of kids under the age of 5. Now we're working on youth employment programs in
Because kids are
Ethiopia.
surviving.
So kids are surviving. They're going not only to primary school, they're going to secondary school. I met young women who are going to university. So that's in a 20-year span, right?
Incredible.
It's really dramatically changed. And a lot of it is because the government and the ministers in Ethiopia over the years have said, we really care about kids. We're going to do something about children and their lives for the future. And they make those
And
commitments.
it's still a country that's one of the lowest in terms of their economy, their resources. It's a low-income
It's a
country
very
classified by the
poor
World Bank.
country. It's 100 million people. It's
Right.
very populous. So it's a great example of it really is about commitment. It's not about wealth. It's not about where in the world the country is. It's not about natural resources. It's about commitment.
Now, what about countries that are in a state of conflict or instability? Because unfortunately, there's still, we have this view of kind of the developed world, the developing world. That's
Yeah.
antiquated now, and there are many more kinds of buckets you could assign if you needed to kind of categorize where countries are. And one of the big ones and growing areas are countries in conflict. It's probably 20, 25 countries that would fit into that category.
That's right.
What is the situation there for children?
So that is the one place, the one indicator where we did not see improvement. So if we looked at these 8 childhood indicators, there was one that looked at the number of children affected by violence and conflict.
Mhm.
That number has risen dramatically since 2000. So 80% increase. So 15 million, 30 million more kids that are affected by conflict
Wow.
than were. So that means that, and that's really driven by places like Yemen, Syria, many countries, Somalia, South Sudan. So those countries where you've got both external conflict
Mhm.
or a lot of times civil war.
Yeah.
That's really what's causing this impact on children. And if you look at the countries at the bottom of the index, so you have Niger, you have the DRC, you have CAR, these are countries that really have either are in active conflict right now or they've recently come out of conflict. And it has a huge impact on children. And over that 18 years, that's really been the one thing that has really not gotten better.
And that's a place where it's not just about commitment of the governments in those countries. They say sometimes it's a civil war situation. There
That's
might
right.
be multiple competing groups in the country. But
That's
that's
right.
also about the global community's commitment. Thinking about a situation like Yemen.
Yes.
How should we look at or understand a situation like that?
Well, Yemen is a great example. Was recently there to visit our programs in Yemen. And what you see in Yemen, the impact on war is really dramatic there. Not only are kids dying from bullets and bombs, so
Yeah.
probably 40 kids a month that are being killed outright, but we estimate that 85,000 children in the last 4 years of this war have died of malnutrition. Because you can't get food in,
Yeah.
you can't get medical services in, you can't get malnutrition clinics set up in that kind of conflict.
That is
So
a stark number. I mean, just to think
huge
about it,
number.
85,000 children. Yeah.
Over 4 years. So that's where we really need the international community. And one of the things that I did when I came back was to go and visit, with our politicians. And in the U.S., we happen to have leverage over the Saudis and the Emiratis, and
Mhm.
said, we have to make sure that this is not impacting children. We have to put a stop to this war. We have to be able to get supplies in. We, as the U.S., are supporting this war.
Yeah.
There's something we can do. And, stopping conflict is the single biggest thing that we could do to dramatically get those numbers everywhere back up to where they should be.
You've been doing this for a while now. You keep saying 20 years.
Yes.
So thinking ahead, if you're going to do this report again in a few years,
Yes.
what do you think are some of the looming issues out there that might be affecting children in a way we don't see today?
Yes.
What worries you? What concerns you? Or what opportunities do you see down the
Yeah,
road?
well, there's one thing I do want to touch on, especially here at Women Deliver, and that is the issue of child marriage. So even though that number, we've seen a reduction of about 25%
Yeah.
in child marriage under the age of 18, there are still millions and millions of girls that are getting married under the age of 18. And in most cases, it's illegal, but it's still happening.
Right.
So there was a piece of the report report that looked at child marriage specifically, and by 2030, when we are supposed to have ended child marriage, we'll still have 10 million girls
Yeah.
that are going to be married under the age of 18 in that year, and 2 million of them will be under 15.
Yep.
So that, again, is a very, very critical issue. It's very critical for that girl because she will most likely drop out of school. She'll most likely have a baby within a year.
Right.
That baby is going to be less healthy. That girl's future is going to now be, it's not going to be up to her.
Right.
And most of the time, these marriages are not up to the girl. So it's a
course not.
basic rights issue.
Yeah, it's a forced marriage, a lot of people call it, not
Forced
even just
marriage.
a child marriage.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. So we really, that's one area where we're really going to be focused.
I'll just tell you on that point, because I've done some research on
Yep.
this recently. My new book just came out, The Business
Yes.
of Changing the World.
Yes.
And I have in there the story, my grandmother actually, she was married when she was 13 years of age in India.
Yep.
And she was married in the early 1920s. And it was in 1929 that they instituted the first law
Right.
against child marriage.
Yes.
And yet, even after that law was instituted, many millions of kids were still forcibly married, at child ages, at young ages. They updated it in the 1970s,
Yep.
around the 1970s, and said, now it's girls at 18 and boys at 21. They kind of increased the age category for marriage. Even then, after that, many millions of kids were married off. And today, even at this point, it's something like a quarter of the population in India are married around under 18, and about 7 or 8% below 15 years of age.
That's
And this
right.
is obviously a huge country, a very populous country. So it shows you that the laws and the regulation are a part of it. They're a part of the answer.
Right.
But we can't stop there.
It's really, it's about behavior change. And we have large child marriage prevention programs in India. And one of the things that I met a young girl there in last year. And one of the things we're doing is empowering these girls to actually be able to have these conversations with their parents and say why it is they want to actually remain in school. And she told me this story about how she had she'd been talking to her father, and she said, I really don't want to get married. And by the way, I'm a lot smarter than my brother here. And if you keep me in school, I promise I will do a lot better for the family than he's going to.
And it worked. Wow.
So those are the kinds of things we really have to look at, empowering girls to be the spokesperson for their future.
Well, that ties a lot into Women
what you
Deliver
have
in
to
a
do.
sense, because
That's right.
the reason an argument like that might work nowadays is that father might be able to look around and say, well, there are women in the society earning real money. There are women employed in the formal sector.
Yeah.
In fact, in my book, I talk about how there are programs, including a Save the Children program, that are showing results around a very basic thing, like giving cooking oil to a family every few months and saying, we'll give you the cooking oil so long as your daughter remains unmarried. And in a way, it works. The childhood marriages were dropping under these programs. We'll give money, if not cooking oil. But usually right when the program ends, so when the daughter becomes 18 years of age, she's immediately married off. And so it shows you maybe her status hasn't actually changed, even though we've been able to delay the marriage a bit. Whereas there's research that shows that when women get positions in employment in the formal sector, in the business process, outsourcing industries, the tech firms in India, that really starts to fundamentally change the way their whole family and community sees them. They say, well, these are women who are earning a living, they're supporting the household, their daughters see them in a different way, their fathers see them in a different way, and you get this kind of systemic change that hopefully we won't be having this conversation 5 years or 10 years or 50 years from now about child marriage, but sadly, as you say, it's still a big issue.
Yeah, that's right. And I think in India, the other factor that really helps is having women in positions within the government. So if you look at parliamentarians and you look at within the states,
Right.
leaders of those states, that's really powerful. Because again, I think parents can then look up and say, oh, okay, yes, if I keep my daughter in school, these are the pathways that can happen.
Now, you highlighted, just thinking again about what some of the looming issues might be down the road, you highlighted countries that are in a state of conflict, mostly
Yes.
civil war situations.
Yep.
What about climate? Is that
Yep.
on your radar screen in terms of climate migration? Some of the numbers we hear are just dramatic,
Yes.
that if we don't reduce the CO2 levels or bring the curve down, you might see 1 billion people forcibly migrate because of the climate.
Yes, I think this, migration overall has become a huge area for Save the Children. And some of that migration is driven obviously by refugee populations, but there's also the climate impact of migration. And you see that in places like Somalia, where you have pastoralists, communities that are migrating to try to travel to where their animals can be fed, right? And sometimes that's across countries, sometimes it's within countries. But that is we have massive programs for pastoralists in Somalia, northern Kenya, southern Ethiopia. And that is a really tough way to be a child, right?
Yeah.
Because you're moving around. School is very hit or miss.
Right.
And if these kids don't get an education, it's likely they'll continue to be a camel herder or a goat herder, and it gets harder and harder every year for that kind of lifestyle. So to happen just
Yeah.
because of climate and because of these cyclical droughts that come faster and faster. So one of the things we're looking at is how do you get children through an education cycle, even through primary school, if they're living in these kind of pastoralist communities. We actually have camel libraries which
Wow.
travel around with these pastoralist communities to actually provide, and what comes with a teacher, camel, library,
And
teacher.
Amazing.
And they travel around with the families because they travel in groups and they travel around with the families and try to get the kids up to the point where they're literate, they have basic math skills, they have the basic skills they need, that they could do something else.
Yeah, you know,
So,
I met an amazing
tough.
woman this year who I interviewed for Devex, who is herself a pastoralist in the Lake Chad region. She's a woman leader
Yes.
of her community, and she was just telling me the incredible challenges they face because Lake Chad has shrunk because of the climate 90%. So the typical way that they would live and feed, eat fish, et cetera, all of that is going away, and the situation for children in those circumstances is really tough.
Yeah, very, very difficult. But if you can't get kids up to the point where they can get a basic education, it's hard to do any kind of vocational training or different options that they would have. So I think more and more of our work for Save the Children, if I look 10 years out, more and more work will be in conflict areas, in climate-affected areas, with the poorest families and children. And that's really what we've dedicated ourselves to do. We want to try to reach the most deprived kids, the kids that are most left out. But that's going to be tough because those are dangerous places. They're really tough places to work. But if we're going to really move the needle now in the next 10 years, like we've moved it in the last 18, that's what we're going to have
And I
to
think
do.
what's so hopeful about that report, maybe we can end on this point, is that if we know, as we do, that we can make tremendous progress when we align and focus on the most important issues. And today, the resources available are extraordinary, whether it's billionaire philanthropy or whether it's private investment or government aid. Enormous opportunities out there if we can focus on the things that matter most and what matters more than kids.
Right. Absolutely. And I think I'm always a glass half full person. You have to be in this line of work. And I just look at what we've been able to do and I say, if we can do this in these really hard to reach places, we can actually get all the way and get the glass all the way full for every single child. And that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you for your tremendous leadership at Save the Children.
Thank you.
For this report and for all the work you and your colleagues are doing.
Thank you, Raj.